might not believe how an ordinary taxi call turned into something I never expected. That evening, all I wanted was a simple ride home. The usual quiet trip where the city lights blur past the window and your thoughts drift somewhere far away. Nothing special. Nothing memorable. But sometimes life has a strange way of interrupting the ordinary. That night, a brief encounter stirred emotions I believed had faded long ago. It was one of those rare moments when something small and unplanned quietly shifts the way you see the world, and perhaps even yourself. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments which city you're listening from. It truly helps us a lot. Now let's continue the story. It was late March, and the evening air carried that familiar chill that makes you pull your coat closer. The sky above the city was deep and clear, just painted in shades of dark blue and black, with streetlights glowing softly below. The whole city seemed calmer, somehow, as if the day's noise had finally settled. I had spent most of the afternoon running errands and catching up with a couple of friends over coffee. By the time evening arrived, I felt pleasantly tired and ready to return to the quiet comfort of my apartment. My building was old but full of character. The wooden stairs creaked beneath each step, a sound I had grown oddly fond of over the years. It was the kind of place that felt alive in small ways. After slipping on my coat, I took out my phone and called a taxi, expecting nothing more than the usual routine: a polite driver, a silent ride, and the warm familiarity of home waiting at the end. A few minutes later, I stepped outside. The cold air brushed against my face, and I wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck. That's when I noticed him. He wasn't sitting in a taxi or waiting behind the wheel of a car. Instead, he stood quietly on the corner of the street, as though he had been there for a while. There was something about him that immediately caught my attention. Not in an obvious way, but in a subtle, almost curious way that made me pause. He looked to be in his early 60s. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his posture carried a quiet dignity. A long, dark coat hung neatly over his shoulders, and even from a distance, there was a certain calm confidence in the way he stood. Then he began walking toward me. For a brief moment, I wondered if he had mistaken me for someone else, but when he stopped a few steps away, his expression was warm and composed. "Are you waiting for a taxi?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost soothing, with a gentle curiosity behind it. "Yes," I replied carefully, glancing down the street for the car I had ordered. I called one a few minutes ago." A small smile appeared on his face, subtle, almost shy. "I'm Henry," he said, extending his hand. I hesitated for just a second before shaking it. His handshake was firm, but respectful, the kind that felt sincere rather than imposing. Oddly enough, that simple greeting carried a strange sense of familiarity, like meeting someone you somehow trusted, even though you had never met before. I told him my taxi should arrive soon. He nodded, but instead of stepping away, he remained there for a moment, as if considering something. "I hope this doesn't sound too forward," he said thoughtfully, "but I'd like to offer you something. Nothing complicated, just something simple that might make this evening a little more memorable." His words caught me off guard. A mysterious offer was the last thing I expected while waiting for a taxi. My curiosity stirred and I felt my heartbeat quicken, not from fear, but from intrigue. "Memorable how?" I asked. Henry glanced down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "A cup of tea," he said quietly, almost like he was sharing a secret. "There's a small tea shop just a block from here. You don't have to accept, of course, but I would enjoy the company." There was something disarmingly sincere in the way he said it. I wasn't used to strangers making such personal invitations, especially someone who seemed so composed and deliberate. Yet there was a warmth in his expression that made the situation feel unexpectedly safe. For a moment, I considered simply waiting for my taxi and continuing with my evening as planned. But something about the moment, the quiet street, the cold night air, and the calm sincerity in Henry's voice, made it hard to refuse. "I suppose," I said slowly, "I could spare a few minutes." His smile widened slightly, still gentle and restrained. "I promise," he said softly. You won't regret it." We walked together toward the small tea shop he had mentioned. It was tucked between two taller buildings, almost hidden from the busy street. A warm light glowed from its windows, inviting and peaceful. Inside, the space felt cozy and quiet. Wooden tables filled the room, and shelves behind the counter were lined with glass jars filled with different tea leaves. The air carried the soothing scent of chamomile and Earl Grey, blending together in a comforting aroma. The moment we stepped inside, it felt as though we had entered a different world, one far removed from the restless pace of the city outside. Henry gestured toward a small table near the window, and we sat down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, though. If anything, it felt like the beginning of something unexpected. Henry pulled out the chair by the window before I even had the chance to reach for it. It was such a small gesture, almost old-fashioned, but it made me feel noticed in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. There was a quiet respect in the movement, something thoughtful and deliberate. I felt myself smile without meaning to. He ordered a pot of green tea for the both of us, and while we waited, the conversation began almost effortlessly. What surprised me most was how natural it felt. Usually, conversations with strangers carry a certain awkwardness in the beginning, but with Henry, the words seemed to find their own path. He asked about my day, about the little errands that had filled my afternoon, about my family and the books I liked to read when the evenings were quiet. In return, I asked him about his travels, the work he had done over the years, and the small observations he had gathered along the way. There was no sense of hurry, no hidden intention, just two people exchanging pieces of their lives. Every so often, he shared a small story, something simple yet somehow meaningful. I caught myself laughing softly at his gentle humor, feeling a lightness spread through my chest that I hadn't realized I had been missing. By the time the tea arrived, the faint tension of our first meeting had faded completely. The waitress placed the pot and 2 cups on the table, and Henry carefully poured the tea before sliding one of the cups toward me. For a brief second, our fingers brushed. It was the slightest contact, almost accidental, yet it carried a quiet electricity. Not the kind born from passion or impulse, but something subtler, an awareness of another person's presence. In that moment, I understood that the evening was unfolding in a way I had never anticipated. This wasn't about romance or some dramatic adventure. It wasn't about danger or excitement. It was something far simpler, yet strangely more meaningful. It was about being seen, about sitting across from someone who listened carefully, who noticed the small details in your words, and who responded with genuine curiosity. As we sipped the tea, I glanced toward the window beside us. Outside, the city lights reflected faintly against the glass, blurred by the cool night air. Inside, everything felt calm and sheltered. When I looked back at Henry, he was already watching me with that same quiet attentiveness. There was warmth in his eyes, the kind that made you feel comfortable rather than self-conscious. A gentle sense of warmth spread through me, not only from the tea, but from something deeper. Something that reminded me that unexpected moments could still hold joy, no matter how ordinary the beginning might seem. What had started as a simple taxi call had turned into an evening that challenged my expectations. It reminded me that curiosity still had a place in my life, and that connection could appear when you least expected it. At the time, I had no idea this was only the beginning. After that first cup of tea, I found myself feeling both relaxed and quietly anticipatory. Henry had a remarkable way of making the simplest things feel meaningful. Our conversation drifted naturally from one topic to another. We spoke about memories from younger days, about decisions we had questioned, and about the small, unexpected joys that life had placed along the way. Slowly, the outside world faded into the background. The soft clink of porcelain cups, the steady hum of the heater, and the quiet murmurs of other patrons blended together into a comfortable rhythm. Henry leaned slightly forward, the warm light from the lamp above, reflecting softly in his gray eyes. "Do you often find yourself stepping into new places on impulse?" he asked. There was curiosity in his voice, but no judgment, only sincere interest. I stirred the tea slowly before answering. "Not usually," I admitted with a small smile. "After a certain point in life, routines start to feel comfortable. You learn what works, what feels safe." I paused for a moment before adding, "But every now and then, it's nice to remember that not everything needs to be planned." Saying it out loud gave me a small, unexpected thrill, as though I had confessed something slightly daring. Henry nodded thoughtfully, as if he understood far more than my words alone. "I think the unplanned moments are often the ones we remember the most," he said quietly. They show us things we didn't even realize we needed to see." It wasn't something you would normally hear in casual conversation. It sounded more like the reflection of someone who had spent years observing life carefully, someone who had gathered quiet wisdom along the way. Without realizing it, I leaned forward slightly, drawn not only to his words but to the calm rhythm of his voice. Eventually, as our tea cooled and the evening deepened, Henry suggested we take a short walk. The idea felt strangely exciting. Stepping back into the night carried a sense of both normalcy and adventure. Outside, the streets were peaceful, wrapped in that quiet calm that settles over the city after sunset. Street lamps cast soft circles of light along the pavement, and the air carried the faint scent of damp stone and early spring blossoms. We walked side by side along the sidewalk, not holding hands, at least not yet, but close enough that our shoulders occasionally brushed, a silent reminder that this unexpected evening was still unfolding. Our shoulders brushed now and then as we walked, each touch seemingly accidental, yet lingering just long enough to be noticed. It wasn't bold or intentional, but there was a quiet awareness between us, a subtle acknowledgement that neither of us chose to step away. I caught myself observing him more closely than I normally would with someone I had only just met. There was kindness in his expression, and something steady and thoughtful in the way he carried himself. His movements were calm, unhurried, as though he had learned long ago that life didn't need to be rushed to be meaningful. After a moment of comfortable silence, he spoke. "You know," he said gently, "I wasn't expecting to meet anyone tonight. I had planned a quiet evening for myself, just a book and a cup of tea at home." He glanced toward the streetlights ahead before continuing. "But then I saw you standing there, waiting, and I thought perhaps tonight didn't have to follow the plan." His words settled warmly in my chest. It wasn't the spark of sudden romance or the excitement of something reckless. Instead, it felt deeper, like the quiet recognition of being noticed after years of moving through familiar routines. "I'm glad you did," I admitted softly. "It feels nice. Just talking like this, without worrying about anything else." Henry looked at me and smiled, and that same gentle smile that seemed to belong to another time, an era when conversations were savored rather than rushed. "I think we all forget how important that is," he said. "Connection doesn't always arrive in grand ways. Sometimes it's just a walk, or a shared cup of tea." As we continued along the quiet street, the conversation drifted toward memories from earlier years. We shared stories of small adventures and awkward moments, the kinds of experiences that slowly shape who we become. I told him about the first time I had traveled abroad and how I had managed to get completely lost in the narrow streets of Florence. Henry laughed. Not loudly, but with genuine amusement that made me laugh as well. Then he shared a story of his own travels in Europe, recalling a small village in Spain where he had once stayed with strangers who eventually became lifelong friends. There was an easy rhythm to our conversation, a natural back and forth that required no effort. Listening to him, I realized how rare it had become to feel so relaxed in someone's company. There was comfort in it, yes, but also curiosity, a sense that there was still more to discover about each other. By the time we turned back toward my building, the night had grown darker. Streetlights cast warm circles across the pavement, giving the quiet road an almost intimate feeling, as though the city had shrunk to just the two of us. At the corner near my apartment, Henry slowed to a stop. I hope this doesn't sound like I'm imposing, he said carefully, but I would really like to see you again, perhaps for tea or another walk, whatever feels comfortable. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I didn't want to say yes, but because the moment felt unexpectedly important. There was vulnerability in his voice, an honesty that made the invitation feel sincere rather than casual. I think I'd like that too, I said finally. We exchanged phone numbers, and the simplicity of it brought a quiet thrill. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just a small agreement that perhaps this unexpected meeting didn't have to end here. When I finally stepped into my apartment, the familiar warmth of home wrapped around me. Yet the evening still lingered in my thoughts, like a gentle echo. I poured myself a glass of water and wandered toward the window. Down on the street, the city had settled into its usual rhythm, but in the distance I could still see the faint glow of the tea shop where our conversation had begun. It seemed like such a small place, yet somehow it had shifted something inside me. Moments like that, quiet and unexpected, remind us that connection can still appear when we least expect it. Sometimes all it takes is a small risk, a simple conversation, or the willingness to pause and share a moment with someone new. That night, as I drifted toward sleep, I couldn't help but wonder what might come next from that brief encounter. Days passed, yet Henry's presence lingered in my thoughts more often than I anticipated. Not in a restless or overwhelming way, but gently, like a soft melody that returns to your mind when you least expect it. So when the day of our second meeting arrived, I felt a flutter of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. We had agreed to meet in a small park not far from my apartment. It was a quiet place where tall trees formed a soft canopy above winding paths. The evening air carried the fresh scent of damp earth and the first blossoms of early spring. And as I walked toward the entrance of the park, I realized something surprising. For the first time in a long while, I was truly looking forward to what the evening might bring. The scent of early spring lingered in the air as I approached the park. It was quiet, almost peacefully empty, except for a couple of joggers passing along the path and a man strolling slowly with his dog. The stillness of the place created the perfect setting for reflection, the kind that invites conversation without effort. Henry was already there. He sat on a wooden bench near the entrance, his hands resting loosely in his lap as if he had been patiently waiting. When he noticed me approaching, he looked up, and that same warm, familiar smile appeared. "You made it," he said simply. There was something comforting in the way he said it, as though my arrival had never been in doubt. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, feeling an unexpected lightness in my voice. We began walking along one of the winding paths beneath the tall trees. Their branches formed a soft canopy overhead, and the fading sunlight filtered gently through the leaves. Our conversation picked up almost exactly where it had left off days earlier. Henry asked about the small details of my life, my family, and the things I enjoyed doing on quiet afternoons, the hobbies that filled my time. It surprised me how carefully he listened, how genuinely interested he seemed in things most people would overlook. In return, I asked about his experiences, his travels, the passions that had guided him through the years, and the simple routines that made his days feel meaningful. Eventually, we reached a small fountain tucked along the path. Water flowed quietly into the basin below, catching the glow of a nearby lamp and scattering reflections across the surface. Henry rested his hands lightly on the railing, watching the ripples with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said after a moment, "it's rare to meet someone who listens the way you do." He paused before continuing. "Truly listens. I've met many people in my life, but most conversations stay on the surface. Very few people really see you." His words carried no exaggeration, only quiet sincerity. A gentle warmth spread through me. It didn't feel like praise, it felt like recognition. "I think everyone wants that. I said softly. Not just to be noticed, but to be understood. Sometimes it takes someone unexpected to remind us how much that matters. Henry turned toward me then, his gray eyes meeting mine with calm attentiveness. Exactly, he said. That's exactly it. We continued walking, and the conversation slowly drifted toward the past, toward the memories that shape a life. We spoke about the joyful moments that stay with you, the small regrets that teach quiet lessons, and the experiences that leave their mark long after they're over. There was an openness in Henry's words that made it easy for me to open up as well. Before I realized it, I was sharing stories I rarely told anyone. Some made me laugh softly. Others carried a faint trace of melancholy, like distant echoes of another time. Eventually we stopped again, this time on a small wooden bridge that crossed a peaceful pond. The water below reflected the glow of nearby lamps, and the gentle ripples made the reflections shimmer like delicate glass. Henry stepped slightly closer, not enough to touch, but near enough that I could sense the warmth of his presence. I've always believed, he said quietly, that connection has nothing to do with age. His voice carried a quiet certainty. It's about openness, about being willing to meet another person halfway, and recognizing the humanity in them. His words settled deeply within me. I nodded slowly, feeling a small tightness in my throat. I think you're right, I whispered. Life teaches us to be careful sometimes, to protect ourselves. But moments like this remind us why it's worth taking a chance. For a while, neither of us spoke. We simply stood there on the bridge, listening to the quiet rhythm of the night, the distant rustle of leaves, and the faint murmur of water moving through the pond. There was no need to rush the moment, no need to define it or promise anything beyond what it already was. Just two people sharing the quiet presence of the evening. In that stillness, I realized something. What I felt for Henry wasn't a passing curiosity or a brief moment of excitement. It was something steadier than that, something calm and genuine, a connection that felt rare. As we walked back toward the park entrance, a subtle shift had taken place within me. There was a quiet sense of anticipation, the realization that life still held unexpected moments waiting to unfold, that the capacity for joy, companionship, and discovery doesn't fade simply because the years pass. I glanced at Henry, and he seemed to sense the same thought. He smiled, that calm, knowing smile. Maria, he said gently, I hope we can continue these evenings, walking, talking, sharing these little moments. He paused before adding softly, there's a simplicity to it, but somehow it feels extraordinary. I felt a smile spread across my face, realizing that he had just put into words exactly what I had been feeling all along. A smile rose to my face before I could stop it, the kind that comes from somewhere deep inside, from a place that had been silent for a long time. I'd like that, I said softly. More than you know. Later that night, as I returned home, the city lights shimmered faintly in my window. Cars passed below, their headlights sliding across the street like quiet rivers of light. But my thoughts were no longer in the city around me. They were still in the park with Henry. In my mind, I could see the winding paths again, hear the faint ripple of water beneath the bridge, feel the calm presence of someone who had somehow stepped into my life so unexpectedly. It made me realize something simple, yet profound, that life never truly stops offering new chapters. Even when we think the story has already been written, there are still pages waiting to unfold. Sometimes all it takes is the smallest decision, accepting an invitation, slowing your pace for a conversation, allowing yourself to trust a moment that feels slightly unfamiliar. That evening, as I drifted toward sleep, I carried with me a quiet sense of contentment. What had begun as a chance meeting over a cup of tea had slowly begun to grow into something more meaningful, something steady and sincere. Perhaps friendship, perhaps companionship, or perhaps simply two people rediscovering the beauty of connection at a stage in life when many believe such discoveries are behind them, and the thought of it made me smile as the night finally carried me into sleep. About a week later, Henry and I met again. This time, it was at a small cafe near the river, a warm, inviting place with large windows and soft chairs that seemed designed for long conversations. The soft murmur of other guests created a gentle background hum, and the scent of fresh pastries mixed with the rich aroma of brewing coffee. I arrived a few minutes early and chose a table near the window. Outside, the early evening sun stretched long golden shadows across the pavement. As I waited, that familiar flutter of anticipation returned. But it was different now, less nervous, more comforting, like looking forward to seeing an old friend. When Henry finally walked through the door, the warmth I felt surprised me. Seeing him again instantly lifted my mood. He spotted me almost immediately and approached with that same calm, reassuring smile. "Maria," he said warmly, "it's good to see you again." "Good to see you too, Henry," I replied. I'm glad you suggested this place." We settled into our seats, and almost immediately our conversation found its rhythm again. We spoke about the city, how it had changed over the years, the neighborhoods we remembered from younger days, the quiet streets that still held fragments of old memories. From there, the conversation wandered to books we loved, music that had shaped different chapters of our lives, and the small moments that stay with you long after they happen. With every word, every shared glance, it felt as though an invisible thread was slowly weaving between us, one built from trust, understanding, and curiosity. There was no pressure in it, no expectations, just two people meeting somewhere between familiarity and discovery. As the cafe gradually emptied and the evening deepened outside the windows, Henry leaned slightly forward. His hands rested gently on the table as he looked at me with quiet sincerity. "Maria," he said softly, I want you to know something." I felt my attention sharpen slightly. These moments we've been sharing, they've reminded me of something important. He paused briefly before continuing, that it's never too late to feel connected to someone, never too late to rediscover joy, or to be seen for who you truly are. His words settled gently in the space between us. I felt a small tightness in my throat as warmth spread through my chest. "I feel the same way," I admitted. I never expected this either. I never imagined I would meet someone who understands me so easily again." I smiled faintly. "It's rare, and it means a great deal." Henry nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Rare," he repeated. "Yes, that's exactly the word." Eventually we finished our drinks, but neither of us seemed eager to end the evening just yet. So instead of leaving immediately, we decided to take a walk along the river. Outside, the sky had turned a deep, velvety blue with the final traces of sunset fading along the horizon. The water reflected the scattered lights of the city, forming a glittering path that stretched quietly across the surface. We walked side by side along the riverbank, sometimes talking, sometimes letting the silence rest comfortably between us. At one point, Henry slowed and turned slightly toward me. "Maria," he said carefully, "may I ask you something a little bold?" I looked at him with curiosity, feeling an unexpected sense of trust. "Of course," I said. He hesitated for just a moment before speaking again. "I was wondering if you might like to continue sharing evenings like this with me." He gestured gently toward the quiet river, the glowing lights, the calm night around us. "Walks, tea, conversations like the ones we've been having." His voice softened slightly. "Nothing complicated, just more moments like these, whatever feels natural." Henry finished gently. I don't want to rush anything. I'd simply like to see where this connection might lead." For a moment, I didn't answer. The river shimmered beside us, reflecting scattered lights from the city, and the cool evening breeze carried the faint scent of water and spring blossoms. I realized that what I felt in that moment wasn't just affection. It was recognition, a quiet understanding that something meaningful had appeared in my life when I least expected it. I'd like that too, I finally said, my voice softer than I intended. I think we both know life still holds surprises for us, and I don't want to ignore one that feels this right. Henry's expression brightened, not dramatically, but with a calm relief that seemed sincere and deeply felt. We resumed walking, and at some point our hands found each other naturally. There was no awkwardness in it, no sudden rush of emotion. Instead, it felt steady and reassuring, like a quiet warmth spreading through the evening air. Each step along the riverbank felt unhurried. Each glance carried a kind of silent understanding that words couldn't quite capture. It struck me then how remarkable it was. What had begun with something so ordinary, a simple taxi call, a stranger waiting on the corner, an invitation for tea, had slowly unfolded into something far more meaningful. Not a dramatic romance or whirlwind adventure, but something deeper, a companionship built on respect, curiosity, and the quiet joy of discovering another person piece by piece. By the time we reached my building, the night had grown still and dark. Most of the street was empty, save for the occasional car passing by in the distance. Warm light glowed from the windows of my apartment, welcoming me home. Henry paused near the doorway. "Maria," he said softly, "thank you." His voice carried a quiet sincerity. For saying yes, for taking that walk with me tonight, and all the little paths that brought us here. I smiled, feeling a calm sense of peace settle over me. "Thank you as well," I replied. "What we've discovered, it's rare, and it's beautiful." For a moment we simply stood there. Then we shared a gentle, lingering hug, one that carried a promise without needing to speak it aloud. It wasn't dramatic or rushed, but warm and reassuring, like an unspoken agreement that this was only the beginning. When he stepped back, Henry gave me that familiar, thoughtful smile that had quietly accompanied every moment we'd shared. "Until next time?" he asked. "Until next time," I answered. I watched him walk a short distance down the street before finally turning toward my door. Inside my apartment, the familiar warmth wrapped around me. I closed the door softly and leaned against it for a moment, letting the evening replay in my mind. It amazed me how something so small could shift the direction of a life. Calling a taxi, stepping outside into the cool night, accepting an unexpected invitation from a stranger. Each tiny decision had led me here, to a moment that felt both surprising and deeply meaningful. Sitting by the window later that night, I looked out across the quiet city streets. A gentle feeling of gratitude settled over me. For years, I had believed that certain experiences belonged to another chapter of life, that the excitement of new connections, the thrill of being truly seen, slowly faded as time moved forward. But Henry had reminded me of something important. Connection doesn't disappear with age. It simply changes. It becomes calmer, deeper, more thoughtful. Less about fleeting excitement and more about genuine understanding. And in that realization, I felt something awaken inside me, a quiet sense of wonder that life still had gifts left to offer, not loud, dramatic ones, but the kind that arrive softly, the kind that touch your heart in subtle ways and remain long after the moment has passed.